Okay, then again, yeah. So it's Paris Kasidiaris.
Yeah, that's
Wonderful. um, telling us about taming rich text content in Django.
yeah.
Wonderful. That's what we're here for.
Okay, thank you. All right. So before I get started, I need to say how excited I get every time I have this mic because it reminds me. Do you know the Eurovision contest? Yeah, you know where it's that vibe. So I like it. So thank you very much. So let's talk about prose. Um, it's a strange word. Does anyone know the word prose here? No one? Okay, so when we say prose, what we mean is written or spoken language in its ordinary form, without metrical structure, meaning no poems, no songs, no code. So what I'm doing right now is spoken prose. An example of written prose is this, are we okay? Is this article here. It's a text from a blog post we did when we announced what I'm talking about today. Oops, and that was it. Thank you very much for attending. Okay, should yeah, I have an extra, yeah, let's try the fallback. Yeah, let's go.
It's like football, so you get extra time added.
Okay, thank you. So welcome to the second part of the presentation. And this is, all right. So when we talk about web applications, prose is just multi-line text. But plain text, thank you, I can use this. Plain text is a bit bland, and not all text is cut from the same cloth. We have plain text, we have code, we have rich text, and we want to see how all these are different in our case. So let's spice up the original example. As we can see here, we have some bold lines here. It's the same text as it was before, but it looks a bit different. We have some words that are bold, we have some inline code. So this is what we call rich text. Rich text is just text which is enhanced with some formats and styling to help it stand out. So we can have strong letters or bold, lists, tables, images, subscripts, whatever. All that stuff that make it look more interesting while it has the same content. Let's see what makes rich text special in our case. So, contrary to plain text, it is stored and coded and rendered differently. What that means is that in plain text, we have, it's just a string. We just save the file, and then we just load it and display it, and it's the same thing as we stored it. With rich text, it's different. We have to store it in a way that we can understand how to display it to the user to achieve its goal. And more often than not, rich text is long form. This means that we use rich text to write books, articles, whatever bigger than an email title, for example. And because of the first bullet, because we have to encode it and render it differently, there is no interoperability guaranteed. What that means is that there are many formats that we can save and encode a rich text content, and there are many formats where we can display it. So it's different if we display rich text in a web application or if we render it natively in an iOS application or in a 3D canvas and all that stuff. When I talk about encoding, I mean nothing more special than this. When we save a file as a Word file, it's some sort of encoding for rich text. The same goes for Markdown, and the same goes for HTML. Some people might know and point out that Markdown is a superset of HTML, but most of us don't use it this way, so I have it as a different place here. And let's start getting a bit more specific. Let's talk about rich text in web application. A straightforward way to handle rich text is to store it as HTML, which is the native way to render it in web application. Cool. We should be cautious, though, when we handle rich text in our web applications, because essentially HTML is an application itself, and strange things can happen. And we have to be extra cautious when this content comes from our users, which are an untrusted source. Not because they're bad, but because they can be. So let's see a few caveats in rich text. We will focus in 3 areas: security, performance, and workflow. It's already getting weird. We're talking about bold, italics, images. What's the whole security thing here? I know. Let's find out. So when we open up the potential for rich text, we open up the potential for XSS attacks, HTML hijacking, and JavaScript global namespace polluting. So, in case you don't know, what is an XSS attack? It's a cross-site scripting attack, which means that HTML got injected in our web application without us intending it to be so, and it runs on a different server, and it can grab data from our users or do even weirder things. HTML hijacking means that it can hijack how the page is being displayed to the end user, and JavaScript global namespace polluting, meaning the window, is something that I was 3 days ago years old when I learned about it. So I will spend just a minute to tell you about this because I found it really interesting. How many of you have written HTML in your life? Okay, so did you know that if you add an ID attribute in an HTML element, it gets populated in the global namespace in the window? So if you add ID equals Django Copenhagen in a div, this div object will be available at Django Copenhagen as a variable. Did you know about it? So you learned it today. And okay, so this can really interfere with how we do things. So this is some innocent rich text in HTML format. We have hello Copenhagen in strong. Thank you for this opportunity. So this can be cross-site scripting, HTML, which has injected a script tag below. Here we have some HTML hijacking, where we just end the web page early and we stop it from rendering more content. And this is what I was talking before, is that I can add jQuery as the ID, and if you're, let's say, unfortunate enough to use jQuery, you can be even more unfortunate, so you cannot use it anymore in your page after this, after this strong element, renders. So a few security tips here is that when you handle rich text in your application, you should always sanitize it before storing. And when I mean sanitize, I mean, remove any HTML tags that you do not explicitly need, and remove any HTML attributes like ID that you do not explicitly need. Next is that you should also consider sanitizing before rendering in some cases, because this might be, you might not be 100% sure how it was stored in the database. And in some other cases, when you have to render something really dynamic, you have to render it in its own browser context, meaning in its own, let's say, frame. When does that happen? For example, in GitHub, when you render a Jupyter Notebook document, it is being rendered in a different frame, so because it's super dynamic, you do not want this to interfere with other stuff of the application. So, now that we talked about security, let's go and talk about performance. How much weirder can this get? We are talking about bold and italics. What does performance mean? So, we should pay close attention to performance when we deal with rich text content, because rich text content takes up more space than its plain text counterpart, which actually makes sense. It's rich in data, because if I want to display something as bold text, I have to store this information. As we said before, its content is often long form, so it's different expecting title for a message and the whole content for the message. And more often than not, when we need to list our content, more often than not, at the list part, we don't need the whole content of each part. We might only need an ID or stuff like that. And we have to keep this in mind. So let's go and say a few performance tips about rich text. We strip it of redundant HTML and attributes. Besides being a security guard, this also helps us save some space, which can be really, really important, and we see an example later. Next, we can store this content in a separate database table to avoid fragmentation in our database, because if we have rows where every particular column is just a few bytes and then we have a whole blog post or a document there, this causes fragmentation in our database and it can get weird. And we should fetch this content only when we need it. Let's take an example. These are some release notes from GitHub. This is rich text. As you can see, it has lists, it has links, it has inline code below where it says full changelog. You might not be able to see it, but it is inline code, so it is a bit of text. If you take only the plain text part of this and you encode it in UTF-8, it's about 1 kilobyte and it looks like this. Good. If we take the rich text part of this, the HTML content of it, it's 10 times bigger. It's 11,000 bytes, 11 kilobytes, which, as you can see, it's the HTML here. It has quite a lot of tags that don't make sense for us to store them if we want to just display this thing. And it's just 11 kilobytes. It's not a lot, but if this gets bigger and bigger and bigger because we have articles, documents, and all that stuff, you don't want to mess with it. Now let's go and imagine another example. Let's say we have an application like X, the Twitter thing after it was renamed. And we can imagine we have posts up to 500 bytes of text, this is about 280 characters, and multiple users can post, and users can reply to posts with posts. So this is getting a bit distributed, and it's important. So this is the tweet I made when I was super happy to learn that I was going to do this exact presentation here. And this tweet, if you take the HTML inside the rectangle that I have, is about 500 bytes, a bit less. And we will see some performance tests if we imagine this application with these tweets, and we will imagine two different tables. One will have the tweets with the content of the tweet inline in the database table, and then we will have another table, let's say 2 tables, one that will have an ID, a title, and a link to another table with the content of each tweet. And we will see how 2 different queries behave. It's select star, bring everything from the table, and select only the ID and the title. And because a picture is 1,000 words and I need a chart to make my presentation legitimate here, let's move on and see that. So the orange one, which is the left one, is when we have the content inline. So I will move here and show you that here we have the query execution time in milliseconds. Here we have the query row limit, how many rows we bring with a query, and we see how that thing scales. So if we want to list the tweets and we have a table that includes the content, when we have 1,000 tweets, it's okay. When we have 10,000 tweets, you know, we start seeing the difference. But when we go to 100,000 tweets, we can see that listing all tweets here takes multiple times more time to get fetched from the database compared to just bringing everything in a table where I don't store the content. So I want to be fair, and we will see how this compares in case we didn't bring everything. I mean, we didn't do select star, but we did select ID and title. So even though I might have inline content, I will only bring what I need. And here things are much, much better, but there's still difference. And here, to be even more fair, I had to scale this up to 1 million to see this difference being quite visible. And here, you cannot see it, but the green one, which is the right one, which is the table that has the external ID as a foreign key, is just a bit more. But we can see that as it scales, still, even though I bring everything I need, here I have certainly more time spending to bring the information from the database, which might not seem a bit here, but it's more than 100 milliseconds. And when you have an application that has high traffic, 100 milliseconds, many of you know that they are crucial. And this is only in the database query time. And it's the best I can get, because here I only bring the ID and the title. So we talked about performance. Let's talk about workflow. We need a user-friendly experience, so I can author rich text content and render rich text content. I need to know when something is safe and when it's not. And I need transparent management. I mean, I need it to be super easy for me to do all my stuff without caring about security and performance. So after saying all that things, it's about time we talk about something Django related. So in my company, we created this library. It's called the Django Pros, where we did all that stuff. We encapsulated all this functionality in a library that we could use in our applications and in our clients' applications. It's easy to integrate and use. It's secure and robust. What comes in the box is field and model for storing rich text content either inline or in a different model, if you wish. We have a widget for rich text editing, which for now is the tricks editor. And we have URLs and views for attachments, because you can drag and drop images, and it integrates with the admin site. How do you integrate Django Pros? You install the package, you add it in the installed apps, and then you can use either the document model, so you can have everything in a different table and get the amazing performance that we showed you before, or you can use the rich text field to have it inline. And if you want attachments, you just add the URLs in your URLs file, and then you get everything, you know, working for free. So it looks like that. You can see here you just add pros to your settings file. Here you can have a model named article, where you can have an excerpt with a rich text inline content, because this is not going to be big, and you can have a different one-to-one field for any key for a document to store big data in a different table to get all the performance benefits for free. A few ease of use. Here is how you render this. You render the content of the model, and you have to mark it as safe explicitly, because we need to know that this is nothing to joke around. This is HTML. This can end my jQuery in my website. It's very serious. And if I want attachments, you know, I just put the URLs there, and it just works. So, wrapping up in a bit, I want to say how Django Pros compares versus you name it. So if we have Django Pros versus Django, your WYSIWYG editor, I'm plugging these for free here, is that Django Pros does not care. Okay, it cares because it has the editor built in, but we don't care what this editor is, but we want to focus on the workflow. But if you care about the editor, you can use these tools. Why Django Pros versus content management libraries? Is because we do not want to provide a CMS, but we want to make it easy to integrate rich text into your application. So, the future, we have some ideas about making the editor frontends pluggable so you can use whatever suits your needs best. We're thinking about supporting multiple output formats, using attachments with pre-signed URLs, because right now you have to send the attachment to Django, as you found out, but we would like to make it straight from the browser to the storage, and it would be easy. It would be nice to be able to embed also content that's more platform specific, let's say tweets or social media cards and all that stuff. So, wrapping up, you can find about Django Pros in GitHub, and PyPy, Django-Pros. I will share the slides with you. You don't have to, note it here. You can find it later. Who am I? My name is Paris, and I'm co-founder at a company called Logic. You can find me in social media, in Twitter, GitHub, LinkedIn. I use a different username everywhere to make it really hard for you to find me. I'm one of these guys. And my company is called Logic. We provide professional services for web development with Django. We publish our open source code in our GitHub organization, and you can learn more about us at withlogic.co or email at hey@withlogic.co. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So we've got time for questions.
Yeah, hi. My name is Johannes Wilm. I'm the chair of the W3C web editing working group. So we are the ones that standardize in the browsers that they can work with rich text editing mostly. A lot of this was new to me, things I hadn't thought about. One thing that comes to mind is over the last few years, we have discussed quite a lot about which kind of rich editors actually work, talking about the front end, right, in JavaScript. And it turns out that the ones that just try to manipulate HTML or let exec command or so do it don't really work, because there's just not enough information in there. And it's like exec command, and so is not really possible to configure in any way. And if you get to things like collaborative editing, it's just not there. So the ones that really work are the ones that have a model of their own. So they store the contents of the document, not in HTML, but in their own format, which you then can serialize to, for example, HTML, or which they, you can also have it as a JSON or something. And the three editors you mentioned, they all do it. The CK editor, Prose Mirror, and Trix. And so it should also be possible, it is possible, to instead of storing the HTML, to store this format they have internally and send that to the backend and then store that. And then you don't have the problem that they can magically add JavaScript or IDs to things you don't like and so on, because you have the deserialization method. You simply don't have anything about that. You only allow the things that you whitelist. You only allow those kinds of attributes and elements. Yeah.
So, is it open? I think so. Okay, so thank you very much for the comment. We have thought about it, and I can say that our initial, actually, thank you very much for the work you've done with the W3C, because we've tried to doing rich text in the past, and it was real hard. So we initially intended to use Prose Mirror so we can do this thing, but Prose Mirror didn't have anything that worked out of the box, because when we started this library, you needed to compose the whole thing yourself. But Trix worked quite easily, but I'm not sure if you're able to export the model of Trix. But I'll check it out for sure.
Yeah, send me an email afterwards.
I will.
I'll show you.
Thank you. I will.
Next question.
I think we're okay.
Are you using this in a
Sorry?
CMS?
Actually, we're using it in a few client applications. So in our company, we have clients that we build applications for. So we use it in their applications, and we use it in some websites of our own. So we have a website called remotework.cafe, where you can find cafes, coffee shops where you can sit and work from in different cities in the world. So the content that we put there is authored from this library. Yeah, so we do use it.
Cool. Any questions from the internet? The internet is still taking a chill. Yeah.
Okay.
So thank you so much for the talk.
Thank you very much.